Good evening. We'll start our song number 383. If you would get a copy of the midweek news and notes and read them, because I would flub them up if I tried to read them. So all the information's there. Number 383. If you would, please stand so we can get a good breath and sing that this is a good song. I've a home prepared where the saints abide, just over in the glory land. And I long to be by my Savior's side, just over in the glory land. Just over in the glory land, I'll join the happy angel band. Just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land, there with the mighty host I'll stand, just over in the glory land. I'm on my way to those mansions fair, just over in the glory land, there to sing God's praise and His glory share, just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land, I'll join the happy angel band, just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land, there with the mighty host I'll stand, just over in the glory land. With the blood washed throne I will shout and sing, just over in the glory land. Glad hosannas to Christ the Lord and King, just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land, I'll join the happy angel band, just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land, there with the mighty host I'll stand, just over in the glory land. Please be seated.
Good evening, everyone. If you're willing to raise your hand and admit to this, how many of you all made New Year's resolutions for 2022? Okay, I think I'm counting maybe 10 hands, which is the pretty common response. I think New Year's resolution making has fallen out of favor. And when you ask people why won't you make a New Year's resolutions, or why didn't you make a New Year's resolutions, some of the answers you'll get, one of them is, well, I know I won't keep them. And there is a high failure rate. One study I read showed that about 90% of New Year's resolutions aren't kept. So people think, why even make them? Other people will say, I don't want to put too much pressure on myself. I don't want to spend the year, especially early in the year before I break them, I don't want to spend that first part of the year with this, this pressure hanging over my head, this big goal. So it's better just to not make them. And then I hear other people say, well, there's nothing special about January 1st. It's just another day on the calendar. So why make resolutions? Well, I'm one of those guys that makes resolutions. I make them every year, been doing it for years. I don't always keep them, but I usually make resolutions. There's usually one related to fitness in some way, exercising more. There's usually one related to faith in some way. Usually it has to do with Bible reading. And then I usually have a third goal that's related to something miscellaneous. It might be about writing a book or a travel plan or a house project, but I usually have some kind of resolutions. Well, whether you make resolutions or not, I want to challenge you tonight to consider making 3 New Year's resolutions. For those that didn't have your hands up, I want you to reconsider tonight. I'm going to make a case for 3 of them. And each of these resolutions has a passage from the book of Philippians, if you want to be turning there. And I'd like to suggest that you put these resolutions, you can write them down pretty easily in the front of your Bible, or you can put them on a note card and put them on your refrigerator or on your dashboard, wherever you want to put them. But here's 3 New Year's resolutions for Christians for 2022. Number 1, go outside yourself and serve others unselfishly. Go outside yourself and serve others unselfishly. Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4 reads, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." So this other person could be someone from your school, from your neighborhood, from your place of work, or perhaps even someone in your family. But this year, in 2022, make it less about you and more about them. And as the verse says, we elevate others naturally by humbling ourselves. So that's number 1. Number 2, determined to rejoice despite adversity. Determined to rejoice despite adversity. Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 4, it reads, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And as I thought back over the past year, I was anxious about a lot of things in 2021. I was anxious about the situation with my dad and his health, and he ended up by the end of the year turning out in pretty good shape. I was anxious about COVID, and I was specifically anxious about the effect that COVID might have on our congregation. And here we are in 2022, and we're still meeting, and we're still a church family, and we're still doing good things in this community. As I look back over those situations, what I have learned once again is that my anxiousness and my anxiety did nothing to improve those situations, not a bit. You know what affected the outcome of those situations? Well, it was praying to God about them. When I turned things over to God and prayed to Him about those specific concerns, then things happened and things improved. So this year, I'm going to resolve to rejoice more, even in adversity, to be anxious less, and to turn things over to God. And I think that's a good New Year's resolution, number 2. And then finally, number 3, surrender your life to Jesus Christ. If we drop back to Philippians chapter 3, starting in verse 7, it says, "But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith." There's not a single act or decision that you can make in 2022 that would be more consequential, that would be more important than to surrender your life to Christ, to become a Christian. That single decision affects every other aspect of your life, the decision to put Christ in charge of my life, and it also determines where you'll spend eternity. So this year, if you have resolved, for those that had your hands up, if you've resolved to lose weight or to save money or some other impressive academic or professional goal, I hope you make it. More power to you. I hope you succeed. However, I hope in addition to those goals, you'll consider the 3 that I offered up tonight. Number 1, devote precious time this year to serving others in a cause greater than yourself. Elevate the interests of others over your own interests. Number 2, to resolve to be joyful in all circumstances, especially where logic would dictate that you complain or lash out at others. And number 3, turn your life over to Christ and strive to become more like him. And tonight, if you're not a Christian and you would like to get started on that third goal to become a Christian, or if you have any other need, we invite you to come forward as together we stand and sing.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, and waiting on to rid my soul of one dark clog, to thee, whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, thou wilt receive, wilt welcome, pardon, cleanse, relieve, because thy promise I believe, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, thy love unknown has broken every barrier down. Now to thee I gave thy
Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful for bringing us here together tonight safely. We're thankful for the opportunity we have to open your word and study from it. We pray that we'll always be looking for ways to serve others, as was mentioned tonight, and looking for inside our hearts that we put you first and be able to look to you to relieve anxiety, that thinking we can handle things on our own, and always turn it over to you. We're mindful of those of our family who are dealing with illness, those who've lost loved ones recently. Continue to comfort those who have and be with those who are tending to those of our members who are sick. Pray that you'd have them back at a state of health. They could be back with us soon. Open our minds tonight as we enter our class, that we'll be open to your word and be able to apply it to our lives, so that when we leave here, we're looking for opportunities to serve and bring others to you. Keep us safe as we leave, and always mindful and grateful for the opportunity we have at forgiveness with the sacrifice you made for us by sending your Son to die on the cross. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Before I get started, I want to give another announcement since Tyler is not here. At least I don't see him. Tyler, I want y'all to be aware of, did I think his first ever devotional last week, and he did it in front of 20 prisoners. That's a really hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to pull off, and I just am really proud of him. I want you guys to be aware of that, so when you see Tyler, give him a pat on the back. That's a really cool thing that he did. So how many of you all, I'm expecting more hands than I got on the resolutions, how many of you all are relatively familiar with the Appalachian Trail? Okay, we're doing better on that question. Okay, good. How many of you all have hiked at least a portion of it? Okay. Now, whenever I ask that question, Janet raises her hand, and it's because she has done the width of it. And I give her partial credit for that. It's a little easier than the length, but several people have at least hiked a portion of it, and many of you are familiar with it. Well, I hiked the AT back in 2016, and it was a life-changing experience. It was a big deal to my faith, to my life. It kind of launched me into a book writing phase of my life. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about God and my faith, and like I said, it was truly life-changing. And I think God often speaks to you when you get out of your comfort zone, when you're in an unusual environment with strange things happening around you and you're around people that you're not used to being around. I just feel like God is at work in those situations especially strong, and that was my experience on the AT. So tonight what I want to do is talk to you about my journey on the Appalachian Trail, and we're going to cover specifically 3 things that I learned about God and about faith while I was out there. But first of all, to kind of set the stage, for those that may not be as familiar, the Appalachian Trail goes through 14 states. It starts out in Springer Mountain in Georgia, goes all the way up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. It's 2,189.1 miles. That was in 2016 when I hiked it. That changes a little bit each year as they reroute sections and that kind of a thing. That makes it the longest hiking-only footpath in the world. And since that's kind of a big number, what I like to do is break that down a little bit. So to give you an idea of how long that is, if you were to wake up tomorrow morning and leave Maryville and walk to Gatlinburg, okay, to downtown Gatlinburg, you would have to do that every day for 65 days to hike the Appalachian Trail. So it's a very long journey. It goes across 400 different mountain ranges. And when they were designing the AT, when they were talking about how do we go through a particular state, they did an interesting thing. They didn't ask what's the easiest way through this state, but they asked what's the hardest, like what would be the most difficult way to get through New Hampshire or whatever, and then that's where they take the trail, which is typically over mountain ranges. So there's the distance. The elevation change, as you see there, are approximately 464,000 plus feet, which is the equivalent in elevation change of climbing Mount Everest 16 times. So there's a lot of elevation change going over those mountain ranges. There's 250 shelters along the way. I stayed in them occasionally. Most often I tented, but occasionally stayed in shelters, especially in really bad weather. And each year you have about 3,000 to 4,000 that make the attempt. And on average, about 25% succeed or 75% fail. Back when I did it in 2016, it was a 80% failure rate. So it is a tough challenge. So before I began my journey, I was sitting at the breakfast table with my mother-in-law, who is seated over here, and I was getting ready to go on this hike, and she asked me about it. So I was explaining, why I was going to do that, and went through a pretty brief explanation. And she looked me in the eye. Of course, I was getting ready to abandon her daughter, so there was that. But she looked me in the eye and she said, "Why in the world would you want to do something like that?" And so I thought, well, whatever explanation I gave her, apparently it wasn't very convincing because I hadn't convinced her of anything. And so I went back, kind of into the privacy of my room, and I thought, I need to come up with a better answer for that. Why am I doing this crazy thing? And so I came up with 10 reasons. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but these are the reasons that I took on this hike. First of all, I love fun experiences in new places. I was an Air Force kid growing up, traveled around the world, and I went in the Air Force myself, so I think at last count I have moved 26 times in my life. And for a lot of young people and adults, that would be just really painful to have to go through that. I loved it. I loved the excitement of a new place, a new environment, new football team, new friends, all of that. I kind of thrived on that. And clearly there was going to be a lot of new experiences on the Appalachian Trail. I love the outdoors. I love camping. I love being up on a mountaintop at night, staring at the stars. I love wading through rivers. I like doing all of those outdoorsy things, and the AT offered that. I love adventure, and I can remember years ago, I got a book I think for Christmas, and it was called Undaunted Courage by the late Stephen Ambrose, and it told the tale of the Lewis and Clark adventure. And I remember reading that book and just getting all caught up into it. I got into the planning they did and their communication with President Jefferson and the actual journey and the things they overcame. And I got to the end of that book, just loved it. But I thought to myself, I want to have my own adventure. I don't want my adventures to only happen through books and movies and through other people's experiences. I want to have at least one adventure of my own that I can call my own, that maybe I could write a book about. So I like the idea of an adventure. I like a challenge. I like trying to take on something that is difficult, whether it's running a marathon or writing a book or whatever it might be. I like taking on things that when you first look at it at face value, you go, that's going to be pretty hard to do. Well, I thrive on that even when I don't succeed at it. I like the challenge. I love planning. This goes back to my Air Force career. I did a lot of planning. But the idea that I've got to get from point A to point B, and in the case of the AT, that's Georgia to Maine, with just what I can carry on my back. That was a pretty interesting planning challenge. And not only that, but you have to break that down into 6 months of daily increments. I've got to get from where I'm at today to 12 or 15 or 20 miles down the trail with just what I can carry. Well, there's a lot of planning that goes into that. You basically have to survive on what you're carrying. And so that was a great challenge in the planning. I wanted to get in shape, lose some weight, and I was trying to lose 20 pounds on the AT. I lost 40 pounds in the first month, and I ended up losing 50 pounds by the time it was over. I have since gained back 40 of those pounds, so apparently you have to just keep walking to Canada and around the earth. My mistake was stopping walking, but I wanted to get in shape. I wanted to help the Cologne family. This was a family trying to adopt a child, and they were raising money, and so we came up with this thing where people could pledge money per mile, and so we raised a little bit of money for them. I had a couple of classrooms of 5th and 6th graders at the school that I used to work at who decided to sort of adopt my adventure, and so they put up a map of the AT, and they followed along, and they had assignments based on what state I was in. And a few times on the trail, I got to FaceTime with them and talk about where I was at and what I had experienced, and they asked me questions. But the real pressure thing was they had on their AT map a thumbtack, and they tracked my journey. And so every time I went 100 miles, they would move that thumbtack. And so whenever I thought about quitting, which did come up from time to time, in my mind, of course, I made this out to be a bigger deal than it actually was, but I had this image of these poor children, hearing that I quit, and they're walking over to the map, and they're pulling off the thumbtack, and they're all crying, and they're throwing the thumbtack away. And I just thought, I can't let that happen, right? We can't have these. I can't have my failure, destroy these children's hopes and dreams. So I made that out to be a big deal that it really wasn't, but it worked. The timing was right. When I left on my adventure, I had just turned 50. Janet and I were empty nesters for the first time. And she said, we talked about it a little bit, and she says, why don't you just quit talking about it and just go do it? You've been talking about this for years. And so before she could change her mind, I thought I better get on the trail. So the timing was right. And then it was a promise that I had made my mom that I would do it. My mom was diagnosed with cancer in early January of 2015. She died in August of that year. And right before she died, Janet and I got to do some caregiving, spent some time with her. And we talked about this journey that I was going to be taking, and she said to me, she didn't put the pressure on me like, Steve, you must finish the trail. She didn't put that over my head, but she said, you got to promise me that you will start it. You got to promise me that you will take the first step. And I said, Mom, I will take the first step. I will at least go that far. And so I made her that promise. And so it was part of a promise to my mom. And then my dad, what he let me do is take some of her ashes. He kept some of them, but he gave me some of her ashes. I put those in a bag in my backpack. And so my mom got to go on this 2,200-mile long journey with me in my backpack, at least her ashes. So you put all these things together, these 10 different reasons, and they were very compelling to me. Now, I can tell you, sitting up here right now or standing up here, they still weren't compelling to my mother-in-law, right? In fact, after hearing these reasons, she didn't raise her hand and say, I want to go with you. That never happened, right? But the question is, did they have to be compelling to her? Anybody? No. Who did they have to be compelling to? Me. That's all that mattered, right? So I think a takeaway from that is whatever your hopes and dreams are out there, whatever your big adventure is that you want to take on, they don't have to be compelling to anyone else but you. If you want to cruise the Nile River, if you want to, build a log cabin or do something crazy in life, whatever your big dream is that's out there, no one else may get it. They may not get behind you and understand it at all. They may think you're crazy, like my mother-in-law thinks that I am. But it only has to be important to you and compelling to you. And that kind of leads to this next thought. With a compelling enough why, you will find the how. Okay? And I don't care what you're talking about in life. And to give it an illustration of this, if I were to tell Kevin tonight that there is $1 million in a bag at the top of a tree in the front of this property, how many people think Kevin's going to get that bag? Kevin does. Okay, how's he going to get it? What do you think? What would Kevin do? Okay, he's gonna send Erica up like a real man. Go, start climbing, honey. He could send Erica. What else could he do? What? He could hire a cherry picker and have him go up with the bucket and get it. What else? Chainsaw. We're talking about $1 million, right? He may have to apologize later to the elders, but for $1 million, maybe you cut the tree down. Maybe he flies a drone up with I don't know what he's going to do. But I can tell you this, Kevin's getting that money, okay? With a compelling enough why, you will always find the how, okay? And you can apply that to your own walk, you can apply that to about anything. You can apply it to evangelism. If you have a strong enough why behind your evangelistic efforts, you're going to find a way to evangelize because it's a very compelling why to you. So I had to have that before I started my journey, and you're going to have that on whatever goals that you want to achieve. So I'm making this hike, and throughout the hike I am writing down on my little phone in the notepad things that I learned, observations. And I came up with 56 of those. I called them FOB fundamentals. FOB was my trail name. And I decided to cover 3 of those 57 observations tonight. All right, here's a couple of pictures. That's a bug and a donkey. Each of these has a story that I will not be covering, but they're there. I don't think I ate that bug, and I didn't eat the donkey, although I thought about it. These are some pictures of trail magic. You've probably heard of trail magic. This is people that do good deeds for hikers along the way, typically involving food and drink, and I had a lot of it, and those are some of the pictures. Okay, so let's start with FOB fundamental number 29. Whatever role God has called you to do in life, however important or unimportant it may seem, do it well because you are a hero to someone. And the story here, and it's the story behind this picture, I had been hiking for 1,000 miles. I'm in Northern Virginia, and I came upon this tree with this sign on it that says 1,000. And I'll be honest, I was extremely proud of myself. I stopped and I got a drink, and of course I took the obligatory selfie because that's what you do. And I think I even posted on Facebook as soon as I had a chance a picture of this and basically congratulating myself for having hiked 1,000 miles, something I had never come close to doing before in my life. So I was pretty proud of myself. Well, our preacher back in Florida at the time saw my post on Facebook, and this is what he posted. He says, "Congratulations, these adventures are going to make an awesome book one day soon. God will work through this journey of yours to do many great things. I have so enjoyed your posts. And for the rest of us who will never accomplish anything so significant and may feel useless from time to time, I could not help but think about the tree behind you bearing that sign. It has never been anywhere, and yet there it stands and still serves an important purpose. What did our preacher do there? What did he do? Anybody? Yeah, he took the wind out of my sails a little bit, rightly so, because I was a little bit full of myself at the time. But he drew attention not to the 1,000 miles or my epic beard or the famous sign. He drew attention to the tree that bears the sign. And so for the next hour, after I hear his or read his comment, I started thinking about that, the tree that bears the sign. So on this picture here, you now see a close-up. I'm cut out of the picture, and the focus is on the sign and the tree. So what do we know about this tree? Well, this tree got no glory, no fanfare. It wasn't the biggest or oldest or prettiest tree on the AT or even that mountain. Okay, so it wasn't a famous tree in that regard. And yet it had a purpose. It had a job to do, and it did it well. And by doing its job, it allowed the sign and the thousands of hikers who would pose in front of it to get the glory. So it just stood there like a tree with the sign on it, and everything happening in front of it got all the glory. It had a purpose, it had a job to do, and by doing its job, others got the glory. Well, I suspect tonight I may be in a room with some people who have felt useless or unappreciated at times. Maybe at times your life seems a little boring or a little bit insignificant. You might say at times, all I do is blank, and fill in that blank. Maybe it's been a while since your boss or your customers or your parents or your children or your spouse have thanked you for who you are and what you do. Well, I just want to remind you tonight through this illustration that your life has significance because you are made in God's image. Your life has significance because God sent his son to die for you, gave up his life to make your salvation possible, and along with that, God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And I just want to remind you all of that tonight. I think Christians are often the tree that bears the sign. We have a purpose, we have a job to do, and by doing your job, you're giving glory to God. And I can't help, this wasn't in my notes, but I can't help but think about Miss Donna here and the other classroom, Bible class teachers that we have that go in these hallways each week and teach our youngest children about God. You are the tree that bears the sign. You are lifting others up, you're sacrificing, you're giving so that others can learn about God. Our guys in the back running the AV, I don't think we have the AV of the Year award around here. I'm not aware of that. I don't think we give out plaques to these guys. They are the tree that bears the sign. They show up every week, they run the slides, they make sure that the AV is working so that other people can get up here and sing or preach or teach a class and maybe at times get a little bit of glory for that or at least some appreciation for that. But we don't often think of the tree that bears the sign, the AV guys in the back. So what I would encourage you to do tonight is remember those people. Think about those people, the unsung heroes, the trees that bear the sign. You can also ask yourself, how in my life or where in my life have I been the tree? In what roles in my life am I the one sort of propping up my family or my job or whatever it is? And then where have you been the sign? In what aspects of your life have you been the one out in front with people propping you up and allowing you to get the glory? So some things to think about. A couple more pictures here. We actually climbed up a ski slope. You normally ski down ski slopes. It was at this time of year, it didn't have snow, so we climbed up and we had lunch illegally on the ski lift there. And here is some more trail magic at different points on my journey. All right, that leads us to our next fundamental. This was number 41. Some of God's blessings require a little extra effort to find. Keep searching and you may be surprised what God has in store for you. So has anyone here ever been thirsty and out of water and you don't have water nearby? Okay, couple? A few times? Not often, right? In our society, in our culture, first world country, it's not often that you are thirsty where you don't have water and you can't get to water pretty easily. Normally you go to the fridge or the sink or whatever and get your water. Well, I had an experience. This was on day 130. I was in Massachusetts. I had hiked that day about 18 miles. And despite what usually was pretty good planning on my part, I was down to just a little bit of water left. The sun was setting. I was almost out. And I'm not going to say it was life-threatening. I mean, I wasn't laying there about to die or anything, but I was thirsty and I was just about out of water. And that's just not a good situation to be in as a hiker, okay? In fact, I didn't think there was going to be any more water. I think the guidebook said it would be like another 5 miles, and I didn't want to have to deal with that, the potential of being disappointed again 5 miles later. But my guidebook said that there was a footbridge up ahead that had a seasonal spring or occasional water, something like that. And so I thought, well, at least there's a chance there, and there was a place to put my tent up there as well. So I get to this footbridge. The sun's now just about set, and I look out on the footbridge, and I don't see water anywhere. And it's now starting to get dark, and there's no sign of a spring, no sign of water, and I was really frustrated. I was a little bit nervous just because you just don't want to be thirsty ever on the trail. But I thought, I'm kind of in a bad situation here. So I prayed about it. I was like, God, I just really need some water. And then what I did is I said, well, I'm going to go look for it. So I took my backpack off and I went down into that ravine that you see there, that little, I guess it's where the river would normally go, or the stream or whatever. And I thought, I'm just going to go look there. So I put my headlamp on, turned it on, and I'm down under this bridge. It's now completely dark, and I'm trying to find water. And this is just kind of a scary, it's just kind of a scary situation. It feels kind of hopeless. And I had just about given up, and all of a sudden as I was, looking up with my headlamp, I got just a little bit of a sparkle of light and a little bit of a reflection of something. And I walked over there, and there was about 3 inches of water. There was a natural spring of water. And that was just amazing. I mean, I almost cried there in that moment because I knew I had water. So I went back up. I got my Sawyer filter, brought it back down. I pumped 1 liter of water and just chugged it right there. And then I pumped a couple more liters. Didn't look like there was much water there, but it's a spring, so it's continuing to come up. And so I ended up getting water. And then I don't know if you can see, if you look in the center, you see in the center of that dark area there, can you see a couple of dots? Does anybody see those little dots there? Well, let me show it to you the next morning. That was the little spring of water, okay? So let me ask you this. Why did I find the water? Because I went looking for it. I gave a little extra effort. I didn't sit there up on the bridge and complain to God about, why isn't there water here? Woe is me, okay? I went looking for the water, and a little extra effort resulted in God blessing me with some water. Let me give you another example of this principle. It's now day 148. I'm up in New Hampshire. I come to a trailhead, and my little book said at this particular trailhead, if you go left or north, a quarter mile up a hill and you turn right on East Cemetery Road and walk down East Cemetery Road, there will be a teal house on the right. It has an elderly couple that live there that take in hikers overnight, and it got high reviews in my little book. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to go for that. Now, this wasn't a desperate situation. I had water. I was fine. There was actually a soccer field at the trailhead. I could have stayed at that night. But I thought, I'm just going to go for it, maybe get a hot meal out of this thing. So I go up to the door, I went up East Cemetery Road, 0.3 miles, according to my watch, and I'm looking around. There's no road. There's no East Cemetery Road anywhere. And I'm just thinking, well, that's weird. It's supposed to be right here, East Cemetery Road. I don't see a road anywhere in any direction. And so I was a little bit bummed by that. And I was just about ready to turn back, and I thought, you know what, I've come this far. I'm just going to go another 100 yards, and if I don't see the road, then I'll turn back. So I went another 100 yards, and just as I got to about the 100-yard point, I look up and I see a sign in the distance, and I'm like, and go up there, and it said East Cemetery Road. And I was like, yes. So I turned right on it, just like the guidebook said, went down a little ways, and there was a teal house on the right. I thought, that had to be it. So I go up there and knocked on the door a couple of times, and finally this little old lady came to the window upstairs and opened up the window, looked out, and she says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well," I said, "my name's Fob, and I'm a AT hiker, and I heard that you guys might take in hikers." And she says, "Well, we normally do. We've been doing it all season, but we decided to take this week off." And I was like, "Well, that's fine." I said, it's okay. I said, "I can go back down to the soccer field. I'll be fine." And she says, "Well, are you by yourself?" And I said, "I'm by myself." And she says, "Well, you know what? Come on." And I said, "Are you sure? I hate on your week off to be bothering you guys." She says, "No, it'll be fine. Just one of you. We can do that." So, so she came around, let me in the house. She and her husband are both in their 80s. I think he's 86. He was sitting in the living room watching TV, and they asked me to have a seat on the couch. So I took my pack off there, and I'm just covered in sweat. I mean, I'm just dripping wet. I felt bad even sitting on their furniture, but I did. And then she went into the kitchen. I started making some small talk with him, and then she brings out a sandwich for me, a ham sandwich, which was just delightful. I mean, it was wonderful when you're hungry. And she said, "This isn't dinner. This is just a snack. We're going to have dinner here in a minute, but we're getting ready to go ahead and watch Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman." Okay. So this is where it becomes like a surreal, like a Twilight Zone episode. So here I am. I'm covered in sweat. I'm sitting with these two people in their 80s. Eating a ham sandwich in Massachusetts. I don't even know what town I'm in, to be honest with you. And I'm watching Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And I got to tell you, Dr. Quinn, she's a pretty good medicine woman. Pretty cute. And I'd been out in the wilderness a long time. But I enjoyed the episode. And we watched it together. And then she came, we got done watching. I commented to this couple. I said, "Well, that was a great show. I'd never seen that before. And I really like that." And she says, "Well, good, because we have the entire first season on DVD." And so I'm immediately thinking, like, are we about to binge watch Dr. Quinn? Like, do old people even do that? And you had mentioned supper. Like, how does that fit into this binge watching plan? So I got a little bit nervous, but she didn't have that in mind. She ended up cooking this magnificent meal for me. I mean, it was awesome. And then we sat around telling stories. They told me that they were fifth generation sugarers. So they make maple syrup. They're fifth generation, their family making maple syrup. And I think it was 12 years earlier, AMC channel had done a big documentary on their family, and they showed me the documentary as we're eating. And then she said, these are all magical words to a hiker, but she said, "If you want to give me all your dirty laundry, I will be happy to do a load for you." Well, that's a home run for a hiker, someone willing to do your laundry. And then she said, "And your bed will be upstairs. There's a hot bath. There's essential oils and bubble bath and all that." I mean, it was just like, yeah, that's what I said. I was like, whoa. So I go up there. I get a shower, and then I take a bath. She calls me down, and I bring my laundry. Of course, we had the meal. And then the next morning, they had a huge stack of pancakes and bacon and ham and all that with the family's homemade syrup. It was wonderful. And so I thought back on that, and I got all of those things. Why? Why did I get all those things I just listed? Yeah. I got to the point where the road was supposed to be. I had gone 0.3. I know that because my watch is pretty accurate. I was at where I was supposed to be, and there was no road there. The only reason I got all those blessings is because I went another 100 yards. Another 100 yards, okay? Made the turn, got all of those things. I got a sandwich, I got a video, I got a hot bath, I got breakfast, I got laundry done, and I got a new appreciation for Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, all because I went the extra step. Didn't get a car, no. That would have been nice. Matthew 7:7 says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you." So my question for you guys tonight on this particular point is, why do you think Jesus tells us to ask, seek, and knock? Why not save us the trouble and just drop blessings in our lap? Kind of a deep question. Anyone want to take a shot at that one? Why does he not just have the water there visible at the footbridge?
You learn lessons from making the effort.
You learn lessons from making the effort, okay? Okay, that's great. That's awesome. What else? What's that? He wants to know you want it. You're willing to work for it. I heard another word over here I liked. You appreciate it. I mean, it's been 5 years, y'all, and I'm still talking about that water. 3 inches of spring. 5 years later, I'm still talking about that spring. I'm still talking about that homemade syrup and that load of laundry. 5 years later. I appreciate it. Man, I appreciated it then, and I'm still talking about it today because I had to give a little bit extra, okay? And so another question I have for you would be, have you ever, you just think about this for yourself, have you ever, through sheer determination, discovered water in a seemingly dry ravine in your life? Think about your own life, some blessings that have happened simply because you didn't quit. You just kept trying. You kept looking. You went the extra 100 yards. You went under the bridge looking for the water. Have you ever reaped a blessing by going the extra mile? Another way of looking at that is, and I think back over my life, and I would encourage you to do the same, but how many blessings have we missed out on in life because we weren't willing to go the extra mile? We'll never know, but I wonder how many springs, how many pancake breakfasts, so to speak, in my life I missed out on because I quit at the point where it became difficult or frustrating. I quit on the footbridge rather than going underneath the footbridge, okay? Something to think about. I think there's a lot of blessings out there that we miss out on. A couple of more pictures here. This was a spring, a glacial spring in New Jersey of all places, and that's a campfire in Georgia early in my hike. Here's some more trail magic along the way. And that brings us to the final fundamental I want to talk to you about tonight, number 41. Some of God's blessings require a little extra effort to find. Keep searching and you may be surprised what He has in store for you. Actually, I just read the wrong one. Let me back up. Oops, sorry. Thanks. Wrong one. Here we go. Fundamental number 9. You will eventually see every person you know one final time. Since you don't know when that time will come, leave nothing unsaid and leave no kindness undone. So this is the story of Baltimore Jack Tarlin. Baltimore Jack was a trail legend. He had hiked the AT all the way through 9 times. 9 times. That's like 20,000 miles, okay? Mind-boggling. He loved hikers, history, and bourbon, but not necessarily in that order. But he was a legend. He was a rock star among hikers. So I get to Franklin, North Carolina. This is a town where you have to take a shuttle to get into the town or hitchhike. And there was a guy there that runs a shuttle because he runs a hotel there, and he will shuttle people to his hotel. So we waited for the shuttle to come. It's me and 6 or 7 other hikers. The little shuttle comes up, we get on, and as we sit down, we look up, and sitting right behind the driver, the owner of the hotel, is Baltimore Jack. And I mean, the whispering started. We were like, that's Baltimore Jack. He's a guy that everybody on the AT knows about. He's a legend, like I said. Well, he was a really interesting guy with a great story. And of course, we're very curious as prospective through hikers on what we can learn from this guy. So we start peppering him with questions. We're asking this guy about, what tent he used and his food and just his experiences. And we just want to get as much out of this guy as possible. And he obliged. He answered all of our questions. We had a great experience with him. And then I thought I would see him in town that night, because you go around town, you go to the outfitter and that kind of thing. Didn't see him again, and he died 42 days later. I was further up on the trail, and I learned about him passing away. So he died. And as I was writing my book about my experiences on the AT, I did some research on him, and I found out a lot of things about him after he was gone. I found out he was from Brookline, Massachusetts, that his parents had passed away when he was young, that his father had promised to hike the Appalachian Trail with him, but they never got to do it because his father passed away when he was young. He had been homeless for many years. He had struggled with alcoholism, and he had struggled with bad knees. He got his name Baltimore Jack from the Bruce Springsteen song that has those lyrics, because he had left behind a daughter that he loved and went out in the wilderness and never came back. But on the Appalachian Trail, Baltimore Jack found friendship, and he found community, and he found a place that he could call home. But I learned about him, I learned his story after his death. And that really bugs me. That really drives me crazy. Not once did I say to him, how are you doing? You know, how's your life going? I never really got to know him that well personally. I certainly never shared my faith with him. And then I never saw him again. He was gone. Okay, so it was a missed opportunity. That time on the bus with him was all about me and what I needed and the other hikers and our questions. No one ever asked him how he was doing or what he was up to. Okay, and that was a missed opportunity. Let me tell you about another guy I met on the trail. Mumbles was his trail name, and he was a millennial. We had hiked a little bit together, had been at a couple of campgrounds together in Tennessee. He was a younger guy, a lot faster hiker than I was. And this one particular time, we were actually hiking together on the trail in Tennessee. And he said, he asked me, he said, did you hear that there's going to be a case of beer at the Over Mountain shelter tonight? Some trail angel is bringing a case of beer. And I was like, yeah, I heard about that. And he says, well, you don't sound very excited. And I said, well, I mean, it's not that big a deal to me. I don't drink. And so that led to a discussion about my faith. And I talked to him about why I didn't drink and, you know, the influence I want to have on people's life and that kind of thing, and some family reasons. And so we talked all about my faith, and I kind of told him about my story. And then I wanted to hear his story, like what makes him tick? What's his background? And he says, well, I do have a pretty interesting story that I'd love to tell you about, but you're kind of slow. And I want to get to Over Mountain Shelter, so why don't we plan on me telling you my story around the campfire tonight at Over Mountain Shelter? I said, Mumbles, that'll be great. I said, I'll see you there. Have a good hike. I'll talk to you later. Well, I never saw him again. Okay, never saw him again. He wasn't at the shelter that night, didn't have that opportunity. So later when I'm writing my book, I'm trying to find out, because at the end of my book, my second book, I tell about kind of an update on where people are at, and I wanted to kind of update my readers on what happened to this guy. Did he finish? Where's he at? So I talked to a friend of his, the guy in the purple shirt there on the bottom picture. Tetris was his trail name, from New York, and I talked to Tetris and I said, hey, what happened to Mumbles? I know you were friends with him. And he says you didn't hear. And I said, no. And he says, well, after he finished the trail, but after he got off, he committed suicide, killed himself. So he finished the trail, but then he took his own life. And so I started talking to Tetris about that. And he said that this guy had a lifelong battle with drugs. He had been taking drugs since he was like in junior high. And he had been going to therapy, counseling, that kind of a thing. And his therapist, I guess he had floated the idea of hiking the Appalachian Trail. And the therapist said, I think that'd be great. You ought to go hike the trail. Maybe you can hike off this addiction. You can get away from your bad influences, some of the friends that you've been hanging around. So he was out on the trail to beat an addiction. He was going through the battle of his life. And I'm hiking with this guy, just me and him, for about 15 minutes. And I shared my story. I talked about my story and my background, but I never got to hear his story. I never got to hear what he was struggling with. Never got to talk to him about that. Never got to say, hey, can I pray with you? Can we just stop and have a prayer? Never got to do any of those things. And I look back on that now, and I realize that was a missed opportunity. And I wish I could go back in a time machine with both of those guys and have another chance and talk to them, okay, and try to encourage them a little bit. Missed opportunity. Colossians 3:12 says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Okay? Well, I was clothed, in those instances, I was clothed in the very best hiking gear that money can buy. But I wasn't always clothed in compassion and kindness. Okay? And one of the things the AT taught me, my journey, is relationships are more important than hiking. Okay, the relationships you make. And if you only get to hike 3 miles in a day that you were planning on 15 miles, it's okay if you had a relationship with somebody, if you talk to somebody, if you can encourage somebody. And people are greater than projects and accomplishments. People matter more. And I think that applies to just about any environment we might be in. Your work environment, I would say, we get caught up in, I did this in the Air Force, I get caught up in getting projects done and having achievements and accomplishments and promotions and that kind of thing. And what you miss sometimes is that the people that you work with, man, those are opportunities. Those are opportunities to get to know somebody, to share your faith with somebody, to encourage somebody. But it's easy to let the projects and the work trump the relationship building. And so that's something I learned on the AT. My encouragement to you tonight, my challenge to you tonight, would be to do a mental inventory, or you can even write it down if you want, but do a mental inventory of your family, your friends, your coworkers who you come in regular contact with. And then if you knew that you were about to see each one of them for the final time, this is going to be my last chance with Charlie or Susie or whoever, what would you tell them? What would you say to them if you knew that was going to be your last time ever with that person? Because here's the thing, you never know when it's going to be your last time with the person. I didn't get a notice from God saying this is your last opportunity with Baltimore Jack. This is the last chance you're ever going to have, Steve, to talk to Mumbles. You don't get those notices. There could be people in the audience tonight that this could be our last time with them, right? Could be. Hope not. Hope to see everybody on Sunday, but it's possible this would be the last time. So who are those people in your life? What would you say to them if it was your last time? And then why not go ahead and say it? Why not go ahead and put it out there and tell them what they mean to you? Whether it's someone in your family or a friend or a church friend, whatever it is, a coworker, go ahead and tell them what they mean to you, because it could be your last time. And that's something I didn't do with these two gentlemen. They're on the far right. This was at a Trail Magic stop at Carver's Gap, which is a great place to get on the AT. And Mumbles is there, the guy that took his life later. He's on the right there, his friend Tetris, and then the couple that was serving the Trail Magics there in the middle. And this is probably the last photo I had with him. So with that, those are 3 of the 57 lessons I learned on the Appalachian Trail. It was a life-changing experience. Whether or not you get to go on an adventure like this or not, I hope you have some big adventures that you are working on, that you have out on the horizon that you want to achieve. It doesn't have to be outdoors. It can be a lot of different things. But I would encourage you to have some goals, particularly as they relate to faith, that you want to achieve in your life, because I think that's important. We have just a minute or two. I will open it up real quickly if anyone has any questions about anything I've covered or about my hike or anything. Anybody have a burning question? Anybody? All right, I guess I covered it all. So thank you all again for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.